It's going a little slow. Okay, I am live on LinkedIn today. It is Thursday, October 3rd. I have a great guest today, and I'm going to talk about my guest in a minute. I just want to talk about some different things that's going on in the housing world and investing world. The purpose of the show is to focus on the single-family rental investing space. I do spend a lot of time talking about the housing market because that is a hot topic with any single-family rental investor that is relevant, and then also talk about what's kind of going on in the housing market, in the economy in general, but really focus on single-family rental investing. So today, the CoreLogic came out with a new report about, or actually not today, 2 days ago, about just the Case-Shiller trends and a lot of different things like that. And so I'm going to bring that report in here, but it's some interesting information. And this is just my screen share of the report. So it's talking about the consumer housing sentiment, talking about the Case-Shiller, where they think the market's going to be going in the next year. And what's interesting is that year over year, we've seen an increase of about 3.6% in house price appreciation nationally. I hate to use national numbers because they don't really mean anything for the investor in a certain market, but it's interesting. And the interesting thing is that they're really thinking that in the next year, house prices will increase about 5.8%. What does that mean on a local market? It just all depends on a. They're talking about millennials. That's a hot topic, and they're talking about how 75% of millennial renters indicate they will likely purchase a home in the future. A lot of people want to move in the suburbs, and that's something I'm going to talk about with my guests here coming up and see what their insight is. There's a lot of interesting, and they call it disturbia, where there's more millennials and more people wanting to live in suburbs that have walkability. They have shops that have more of that 24-hour city feel, but they're not in the cities. Places like Evanston, Illinois, Columbia, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, all these different cities. So my question is, when I see these numbers, when they indicate they will likely purchase a home in the future, what does that really mean? Because what's the future, and do they have the savings? Because the data I've seen recently is that millennials don't have the savings. So can they purchase a home? So here's some interesting, this map is always very interesting because it shows what's going on around the country in the price increases. And really, you've got one up here that is had I think that's, I'm not sure what state that is, but that has lower, not much appreciation, but there's been appreciation in some of the top cities. I mean, Idaho is still leading the year-over-year prices every month. Utah is strong. New Mexico is strong. Maine, Indiana, Arizona, Missouri, Wisconsin, New Hampshire, and Tennessee. What's interesting that you see, these are not your typical, besides Arizona, these are not your typical states that you see a huge amount of talk about them being prime top 10 cities. These are tertiary, secondary, second 50 markets, usually in second top of, if you're talking about top 100 markets, they're in that same tier. This is great because this is to the point of people wanting to move to places where they can, that are affordable, that have opened themselves up for business, and that have great things going on. But it's important that people aren't moving to the far suburbs in the middle of nowhere anymore. They're moving to areas that are within an hour or 45 minutes to an hour of a major city usually. They can live and work in that same area. They have shopping and entertainment, and they have something that there's a soul to the city that they're living in, and it doesn't now have to be a large metropolitan area anymore. And we're seeing more and more on this. I love to read the Ban report by Clark Street Capital. They really talk about this. I'll probably do another show that goes into detail. And here's a home price index. You've got some cities that are doing well, and Las Vegas is still up there. Denver's still doing really well. And this is just a snippet. This isn't the detailed CoreLogic report. I always love this because these are market indicators. And this is from the 100 largest metropolitan areas. And, 23% of the top metropolitan areas were undervalued, 40% were at value, and 40% were overvalued. 16% and that's top 100. Now, looking at the top 50, they'll say 40% are overvalued, 16% undervalued, 44% were at value. So if you're an investor looking at those undervalued markets, and that 23% of the top 100, 16% of the top 50 is a great place to go and find investments. We live in a world now where you can buy investments anywhere in the country, have them professionally managed, have comfort that you've got a great investment, and you no longer have to get scale into a market. So looking at some of these overvalued markets, New York, Houston, Phoenix, Washington, DC, Dallas. They're not listing, there are some other markets in here, a lot of the coastal areas. You see what's happening in places like Miami, New York, San Francisco, Seattle, Washington. There's a lot of things happening in these markets. The luxury market's getting killed right now in these markets. And I've read and talked to some people that are pretty big players in places like Miami, where they're continuing to build luxury condos and they can't sell them. And what that's going to do to the overall market, combined with what's happening in the tech world right now, where you've got places like San Francisco, where you've got a number of, and I posted some of this on LinkedIn if you want to see it, a number of IPOs that are underperforming, and a number of IPOs that have been canceled, and a number of layoffs that are happening in the tech world because of these crazy valuations. So just some interesting things to take a look at and see where the overvalued markets are. And even in the overvalued markets, this is based on home value. There might still be opportunities in these markets to buy investment properties where rents are typically not going to go down if there's any kind of a recession. So just real quick insight there. I'd like to talk about my next guest. My next guest is Bill Neville from the Intrust Group. Bill is one of the regional regional business development guys with the Intrust Group. He does a lot of these types of events, of podcasts and things like that. And self-directed IRAs are especially for those of you that have been investing into the stock market, that have been investing into different aspects of real estate investing, or just stock investing, stocks, bonds, things like that. There's a lot of turmoil going on. Self-directed IRA investing is a great avenue to invest in the real estate. And again, I'm saying this, and I say it every time, I have not seen this kind of enthusiasm in real estate investing, and it's not speculation. It's solid, long investment. So Bill, welcome to my show, and I appreciate you coming on live here with me.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. It's my pleasure.
So give me the quick elevator pitch on what you do, why you do it, and your value proposition.
People ask me what I do for a living, and I tell them that I educate people on how they can use their retirement accounts to invest in alternative assets. And so that's my role specifically, is to provide education. And typically what people ask by that, when I say that, is what's an example of an alternative asset? Excuse me. And it's simply anything other than a publicly traded stock, bond, and mutual fund. So most people who have a retirement account, like 97% of the population that have a retirement account, whether it's a 401k or a SEP IRA or a traditional IRA or 403B or whatever it is, the custodian of that account, in order for a retirement account to qualify as a retirement account, has to be held by a custodian. The majority of the time, that custodian is a bank or brokerage firm, and the bank or brokerage firm limits you to investing in publicly traded stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. So that's just their business model. It's not so much that they can't, hold other assets, it's that they primarily choose not to. So if you want, most people who have a retirement account think that because they have their 401k or their IRA is custody by Schwab or Fidelity or Merrill Lynch or those companies, and that they limit you to publicly traded stocks, bonds, and mutual funds. Most people think that's the only thing you're allowed to invest in inside a retirement account. But in reality, as you know, you're allowed to invest in a lot of other things. You're allowed to invest in almost anything you want inside your retirement account, real estate being the most popular non-traditional asset inside a retirement account. But so in order to hold real estate or some other asset other than a publicly traded stock, bond, or mutual fund, the custodian you have your account with has to be willing to process and hold the asset that you want to invest. And so that's where Entrust comes in. We are a custodian, just like Fidelity and Charles Schwab and Merrill Lynch are custodians. We are a trust company. We are also a custodian, but we're willing to hold alternative assets. We're willing to hold things other than just the publicly traded Wall Street assets. We don't advise our clients. So we don't play any fiduciary or advisory role in terms of selling investments or helping them find investments or doing any due diligence on any investments that anybody makes. It's up to the individual account holder to do all their own research and choose the investment without any input or direction or advice from anybody at Entrust. But if they want to hold a non-traditional asset, as long as the investment they want to do isn't specifically prohibited by the Internal Revenue Code, and we'll certainly talk about what some of those rules are. But as long as you're not trying to do anything that's specifically prohibited, we will process and hold that investment and be the custodian and record keeper on behalf of your retirement account to make that investment.
So what are the benefits of doing that? Why do people invest in their self-directed IRA? Are you allowed to talk about that?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, it simply comes down to if somebody finds an investment that they want to make that doesn't fall under the blanket of publicly traded stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, a self-directed IRA gives you the freedom to do that. So just to clarify, self-directed is not a type of retirement account. It's more of a description of the industry they're in, their service we provide. If I put quotes around the self-directed, when people establish an account with us, they still establish either a traditional IRA or a Roth IRA or a 401k or a SEP or a simple, or we also will hold health savings accounts and Coverdale educational savings accounts. So they still have to establish a type of account with us that still has the same contribution limits and the same distribution rules. A traditional IRA with Entrust or a Roth IRA with Entrust has all the same IRS tax rules that a traditional or a Roth does with a brokerage firm. The only difference is that we don't advise our clients like, again, Merrill Lynch and companies like that will usually have advisors who will, you have a conversation with them, or they might give you a list of mutual funds and say, if you have this level of risk tolerance, or if you're this age, we recommend these few funds, or they'll have a conversation with you about what, how risky you feel, what you want to do. And then they might, and then they'll recommend some investments for you to make. We don't play any part in that investment recommendation side of things, but we'll hold non-traditional assets. So real estate investors, for example, can invest in real estate inside the retirement account. If you want to invest in metals, if you want to invest in a startup company, if you want to use your IRA to be a hard money lender, you can, loan money to borrowers from inside your retirement account, essentially have your account be the bank. We had somebody invest in a racehorse one time and in cattle. You can invest in almost anything you want inside a retirement account. And as long as, again, you don't violate any Internal Revenue Code rules around prohibited transactions.
So I have a question.
Hold that for you.
So I have a question. Do you investing into real estate in an IRA, do you have to, is so if you have $100,000 home you're investing into, do you have to have it all be in the IRA, or can you invest some of your IRA into the home and some of it into, some of it from your personal funds?
Yeah, you can. So you can do that. You can put what's called partnering with your IRA. So you can have a certain amount of money in your IRA and a certain amount of money in your savings account, or you might have a spouse who has an IRA, or you might have friends or other family members, and you can partner together to purchase that property. You also, the IRA can borrow money. There are financial institutions that will lend money that will provide a mortgage to your retirement account. Now, it has to be a non-recourse loan, which means that on that loan document, you can't have any personal guarantees or you use anything as collateral other than the property itself. So the loan document, the only recourse that the lender has in the event of default is they can foreclose on the property.
Correct.
They can't go after you personally. They can't go after any other assets in your IRA. But I mean, just buying all with cash is the simplest and most direct way to do it, but it's not the only way. You can partner your IRA with others, and your IRA can borrow money as well.
And I assume they'll have some pretty strict underwriting standards there. You're not going to get at 80% to loan value. You're going to be at like a 50 or below. But like,
usually you might see 30. You can put 30 down, probably more likely 40. And there is a pretty limited number of financial institutions who are willing to do non-recourse loans to IRAs. We, along with a lot of our competitors, will have a list of sort of the most well-known ones on our website. So, I think most of us self-directed custodians can refer people to say, here's banks or lending financial institutions that we know are willing to loan to IRAs, which does not mean you can only borrow from those people, just that if you find someone else, the awareness has to be that the loan, first of all, is going to the IRA. It's not going to you. The borrower is the IRA. And two, it has to be a non-recourse loan. There can't be any other collateral, any personal guarantees or anything.
So tell me about profits. So cash flow. How does that work within an IRA, whether it's with a lender or not, or whatever? I assume it's all the same. How does your cash flow work?
Yeah. So when you use your retirement account to buy a property, it's the retirement account itself that's on title on the property. So the purchase contract and all the closing documents, when it shows who the buyer is, it's not in your personal name. And I'll explain the titling for specifically with Entrust, but I think most custodians have a sort of similar naming convention. But the name of the buyer that goes on that contract, that goes on the closing documents, and ultimately on title on that property is the Entrust Group, for benefit of, or just the letters FBO. The Entrust Group, FBO, your name and account number. So when you open an account with us, you get assigned an account number. Then you put money in the account, usually by transferring over from an existing IRA or rolling over from a 401k. And then you go buy the property, you find the property, and then when you negotiate with the seller, do all that stuff, and when it comes time to drop the contract, the name that goes on as the buyer doesn't go on as your personal name. It goes on as the Entrust Group FBO, your name and account number. And then those documents come to us for review and signature. So now that your IRA owns the property, you go and if you're going to rent it out, you find the tenant. Again, Entrust has no role in helping you find a tenant or manage the property. And once you find the tenant, if they're putting up a security deposit and paying first month's rent, that money goes to the Entrust Group, FBO, your name and account number, and sent to us, and we deposit in the account. So your account is its own entity with its own tax ID number. It is the entity that owns the property. When you use your IRA to buy any investment, not just real estate, when you have a stock or a mutual fund with, Fidelity or Charles Schwab, Fidelity and Charles Schwab are actually holding that stock and mutual fund for your benefit. The naming convention isn't dramatically different, but you don't actually ever see that because there's no actual physical paperwork like you have with real estate or a startup company or something like that, because it's publicly traded. They're just entering it onto their platform and placing the trade. But the naming of who holds that asset is still, it's still held in that similar vein. So with real estate, you actually see it. So income gets paid into the account, and then bills, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, those types of things. You send us the bill, we pay it from the account. So we're handling all the record keeping, but everything is done at the account holder's instruction. The account holder tells us when they're going to deposit money. They tell us when they need a bill paid, and everything flows into and out of the account with your custodian handling all those record keeping responsibilities on behalf of your IRA.
And then So a couple of questions, because I want to ask you about property management, but and I know some of these answers obviously, but so what happens? So the profits go back to the IRA, and if you're pulling money out of the IRA, you're going to be taxed, and all of those things, just like any other situation. What happens when there's liabilities? So what happens if, for example, the a tenant moves out and you have to do capital expenditures, you don't have enough money in your IRA to do that?
Yeah. Then you got to get money in the IRA to do it.
So because money in the IRA, and the IRA pays it. So you've got to come up with that.
The IRA is responsible for covering that. So if you find yourself in that situation, I mean, it's still a retirement account. If you haven't maximized your annual contribution, you can make a contribution. If you still have money sitting over with a different, like you can have retirement accounts with multiple custodians. So a lot of times people open an account with us, they're not transferring or rolling over their whole entire account. Like they still have money with a brokerage firm and they're bringing over the amount of money that they want to use to invest in that property. So they can always roll over or transfer more money. And if you don't have more money to roll over or transfer and you've already maximized your annual contribution, then your third option is your IRA can borrow money. You got to find somebody to lend money to your IRA. Now, the lender doesn't have to be a financial institution. Like a lender can be any non-disqualified third party. So there are certain people that are considered disqualified persons. Like you can't loan your own IRA money. Your spouse can't, your parents or children. There are people that are considered disqualified persons. But if you have a friend or a sibling or a cousin or a stranger, like a hard money lender, as long as the loan is drawn up as a non-recourse loan, like that's your final option. But one way or another, the money has to go into the IRA first, and then the IRA pays for whatever capital improvements you need to make. You're not allowed to just write a check out of your. And you can't just have some third party, right? Like it has to be the IRA owns the property of the IRA. And you had asked earlier about partnering. If you set up where you've purchased like both in your IRA and your personal name, right, where you've partnered, then that means that your IRA has to pay its percentage. Like let's say you did a 50-50 partnering where you bought a property for $100,000 and you did 50 from your IRA and 50 from your own personal savings. So you own 50% of that, your IRA owns 50% of it. That means that the rent has to go 50% to the IRA, 50% to you personally. Same thing with any expenses or like a capital improvement. If you need to pay for something, your IRA has to pay its percentage, whatever percentage the IRA owns, if you have to pay your percentage. And that's the requirement. If you do something outside of that, you're creating a privileged transaction and putting your IRA at risk.
Right. So then let's get into that, because it's the same thing as you have to use professional. Well, you have to have it third party managed. You can't even go in there and sweep the front porch. If you're driving by and see it's messy, you can't go in and I'm assuming that you can't. You have to be involved to a certain amount of there are day-to-day things that a property manager, even if it's professionally managed, they're going to call you and go, this tenant hasn't paid, we can kick him out or reduce the rent or try to get this, or, hey, the place needs $1,000 worth of work. Somebody has to make that decision. Right. And that can be you as the owner or as the owner of the IRA.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. There is nothing that says that like, you can't manage your property, right? As far as being the responsible authority and decision maker, and even deciding who you're going to rent it out to, you can show the property to the tenant, and like you can be responsible for your asset, right? What you're not allowed to do is there's two things. You or any other disqualified person, you can't ever stay in the property. You can't use it for personal use, like not even for, a day. And you can't do any physical labor on it, right? So no sweat equity. As you said, you can't sweep the porch, can't cut the grass, you can't,
change the light bulb, nothing.
No physical labor. But that doesn't necessarily preclude you. You're not necessarily mandated that you have to get a property manager per se, right? Like if you have a property and you need to rent it out, you want to put an ad up on, some rental Craigslist or whatever you use, and show the property and, and negotiate the rent or any of that stuff. There's nothing that says you're not allowed to do that, right? Now, if you if you are a property manager as a job, or if you maybe buy like some multifamily where like the amount of effort that goes into like doing that and keeping them rented, and where you're putting the equivalent of almost a full-time job, now you're getting into some gray area where you might be committing a prohibited transaction because the amount of sort of sweat equity or labor that's associated with that. But here's the thing, there's nothing in the code, the Internal Revenue Code, that gives strict definitions of when you meet that, right? It says that you can't like essentially do any physical labor on it and that you can't stay in it. But, you know, we as a company encourage people to have a property manager. We think it's a good practice to have a property manager so that you're never even coming close to that sort of line of what would be considered a prohibited transaction. But I do want to clarify, there's nothing that says that you have to have a property manager. You just can't do, again, like sweat equity, physical labor type effort on it.
So I did not know that. I knew about the sweat equity, and I also didn't know, just backtracking a little bit, that you can co-invest with your IRA into an investment property. I thought it had to all be in the IRA and that was it. So that's really intriguing to me. So,
well, and the key is that you have to make that, if you're going to partner with what would normally be a disqualified person. So I'm going to talk about that for a second. What's considered a disqualified person? So you as the account holder, your spouse, your ancestors, so parents, grandparents, et cetera, your lineal descendants, children, grandchildren, et cetera, and then spouses of lineal descendants, and then fiduciaries. So like a CPA or a lawyer or financial advisor are considered disqualified persons to your IRA. So what that means is if your IRA already, let's say you already own a rental property, your IRA cannot come in as a partner, or if your parents own a rental property, your IRA can't buy it from your parents, right? Because they're a disqualified person.
Okay.
And like, and if you already own a rental property, you can't bring your IRA on as a partner because you already own it, right? Same thing with if your IRA already owns a property, you can't decide, I want to come in as a property, I'm going to like buy 20% from my IRA, right? Because you're a disqualified person.
That would be awesome if you could do that.
Right. And a lot of people want to do that, but you can't. But what you can do is you can partner together on a new investment. And the key is that you're buying that property from a non-disqualified third party, right? So on a brand new investment where you don't own it, no disqualified persons own it. If you decide, well, I want to use 80% from my IRA and 20% from my personal savings or whatever percentage, you're allowed to do that. But once you have that percentage, like once you close on that property, that percentage is pretty much fixed unless you like sell off a part of it to some completely different person. So you have to be really thoughtful about like that percentage, because again, any ongoing expenses have to be paid out at the percentage established at the time of it. So if you do 50-50 or 80-20 or whatever, you're pretty much locked into that unless you decide to sell part of it off to some completely separate, non-disqualified.
So you could sell your interest off to a approved or non-disqualified.
Yeah. So anybody other than your spouse, yourself, your ancestors, your descendants, and spousal lineal descendants. So note that I sometimes have conversations with people who will say, I understand family is a disqualified person. And note that there are family members there that are not listed as disqualified persons. Your siblings are not considered a disqualified person to your IRA. So if you have a property in your IRA, your siblings could stay in that property. Your aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, cousins, those are not considered disqualified persons. But anybody that falls in the lineal line, basically up and down.
Well, that's interesting. And the reason it's interesting to me, because I talk to people that are like, well, I've got 20 grand in my IRA or 40 grand in my IRA. I can't really buy anything, but they actually could. That could be a down payment. They could get financing. They could, do a lot of things. Now, when you do when you get again, and just clarifying for sure. So if somebody uses an IRA as a down payment, they get financing. If that's what they can do, if they can make that happen, then it's still all 100% in the IRA.
In that instance, yeah, it would all be inside the IRA.
Unless they co-invested that down payment, and then so if they co-invested that down payment, it would be that percentage of the down payment that would dictate what the percentage is.
you're getting into a complication
Yeah,
if you want
so
to partner and also borrow, but there is a way to do it, but you have to create a single entity to be the borrower. So what
Right.
people typically do if they want to partner and then also use leverage, because what you can't do, what you're not allowed to do is you can't go to the bank and say, I'm putting $20,000 down from my IRA. I want to borrow $60,000 or $80,000 and have it be 20%, 80%, because you're not allowed to use the IRA money as collateral for you personally to borrow money, right? And the bank can't actually lend to you based on that 20% collateral, because that IRA is its own entity.
Right.
So the IRA is going to own 20%, and you're going to the bank and saying, I want to borrow 80%, but you don't own 100%. You are only going to own the percentage that the IRA doesn't own, right?
Right.
So what we typically need to do if you want to partner and borrow money is create an LLC and then partner into the LLC and then have the LLC be the single entity that's the borrower, right? So partnering into the LLC is going to involve putting money into the LLC. The partnering percentage is going to be based on how much money you contribute. So if you want to be an 80% partner in an LLC that's going to borrow and the IRA is putting in $20,000, then you have to put in $80,000 because that's how that percentage is established based on the amount of money that's coming from each of the entities. But then if you have a property that's worth $200,000, you can now go and the LLC can borrow the other 100. Then the LLC buys the property. The LLC receives the rent. The LLC pays the bills. So it essentially becomes a pass-through entity that you can also use as a single member LLC. Like if you want to have checkbook control, instead of having your IRA invest directly in a property, you can have your IRA invest in an LLC invest in the property.
Oh, wow.
So the LLC is on title. It becomes a pass-through entity that gives the account holder checkbook control.
Oh, that's interesting. But profits still must go to the IRA?
So the LLC first, then back to the IRA, right? Because the IRA owns the LLC owns the property. So on an actual transactional basis, on a monthly basis with bills, and the LLC is actually on title on the property. But again, the IRA owns the LLC, so it's still IRA.
All profits.
It's just a
little more control. Okay.
Well, it does. But the reason why I brought up the LLC in the first place was just from a standpoint of if you wanted to partner as well as use leverage, you'd have to do it through an LLC because you have to create a single entity as a borrower. If you're on title with the IRA as a partial owner and you personally as a partial owner, and you want to go to a bank and have one entity or the other borrow money, the bank's not going to lend you on that. At least they shouldn't, because you can't actually use 100% of the property as collateral because you don't own 100%. There's this other entity or person that owns a certain percentage.
So how most of the people, what do they do? What do you typically see? And what's your average kind of just for
property versus LLC, direct title, or versus general investing?
Yeah.
I mean, real estate is by far and away the most popular investment in the self-directed IRA industry. But when I say real estate, there are a lot of people who invest through syndications, right? Who invest through syndicators, where there are, where it's essentially a private fund, oftentimes or almost always established as an LLC. And they might be investing in a $10 million apartment complex. And they are buying some, C-level apartment complex that they want to bring in investors and they want to fix it up and they want to get it all rented out and then maybe sell it. And then all the investors come in. So you might put in $50,000 and be like a 1% holder in this syndication. Within our structure in our trust database, what you would be investing in is an LLC. So that's technically a private placement, but the LLC is investing in real estate. So if you take on that, plus actual holding property, plus people who are doing trust deed investing, plus people who are doing tax lien investing that all fall under real estate because they're collateralized by real estate makes up a very significant portion of the self-directed.
I'm sure.
I don't have actual percentages.
Yeah.
So I don't have those kind of numbers, but it's high. And then you've got precious metals, and then you have actual private placements. You have people who are investing in startup businesses or small businesses, privately owned businesses, or just there are private funds that are investing in cannabis or cryptocurrency, and that are structured as LLCs. So Of the $3.5 billion that we hold, a lot of it is structured into LLCs, but a lot of those LLCs are turning around and investing in real
So
estate.
they could invest into whatever. They could be investing into, in the world I work in, a lot of single family rentals. So they can invest into buying, a fund that is an LLC that's buying single family rentals.
That's right.
That's all very interesting stuff. I really appreciate it. What am I missing? Is there anything I'm missing?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of arms and legs to it.
Yeah.
The one thing that I caution people about associated with self-directed IRAs, or maybe the one thing that you really need to plan for, that a lot of people don't necessarily think about, or people might not think necessarily enough about, is that within our industry, these alternative assets are typically not very liquid, right? Like if you invest in a private fund or something like that, there might be a 5-10 year time frame. Real estate isn't necessarily, like, it's more liquid than maybe something like that, but it's not as liquid as publicly traded stocks, bonds, mutual funds that you can usually flip in a day or two, right? So if there's a chance that either whether you're coming up where you're reaching a certain age where you might be subject to required minimum distributions, or, for whatever reason, you feel like you might have to at some point tap into the cash inside your retirement account, again, it's more along the lines of, you want to think about this because you're not necessarily holding tremendously liquid investments. And so if you feel like you're going to need some cash associated with this, I mean, we've had people who didn't necessarily understand what they were doing, and they made an investment into like some kind of private fund. And then a couple of years later, they came back to us and said, I want to sell this. And my response is, okay, go ahead. Like, go find a buyer.
Right. Or go to the fund and say you want your money, and they're gonna negotiate. You're right. Yeah.
Go sell this for me. Schwab sells it for me. Why can't you sell it for me?
So,
but it's not publicly traded, right? So that's not that. So there has to be an understanding of that you're dealing oftentimes with less liquid investments, and sort of be aware of that.
Well, what's interesting in what we've been doing and what's happening in the real estate world is that there's becoming more liquidity in the real estate investment world, and especially in the single family rentals.
Sure.
So, for example, we've built our marketplace where you can buy and sell investment properties, and we're building up that base of buyers who, we've got people who are living in California that bought a portfolio in Florida, didn't know until now that they can sell it. It's increased in value. They want to cash out and buy a triple net lease, apartment building in California where they live, or a like a commercial building. So there's becoming more liquidity, and with more liquidity it's great because now you can start to buy, and sell and trade assets much easier. And that's why these big institutional funds are buying, and we're working with more funds than ever now. And we it's something I always mention because there are a ton of investors that own assets that don't realize that they can easily sell them for a fair market value. And that's the key. A lot of people think like, well, when I need to sell my portfolio, you're going to have a lot of people are going to come in and lowball. Well, that could be true, but that's not the type of people we work with. It's about a fair market value. It's you can buy anywhere in the country. It's open to all markets, and that's something I want to get. If I don't know if you've kept up with kind of we talked a little bit earlier. You're not really focused on the real estate market as much. There's been a lot of recession narratives and economic narratives out there, and a lot of that's political, and a lot of it's true. We're seeing a ton of, and this affects the real estate markets, and the high end markets are really getting hurt right now. That 2 million plus all over the country is having a hard time because there's a lot of issues with, I don't want to say the stock market, but some of these bigger companies that people own second homes or own the higher end homes are pulling back because they're seeing some things happening. And we're seeing there's just about every IPO that's come out this year has underperformed. There's hardly any that have performed higher than their strike price and their start price. And you're seeing big companies like WeWork that is having some serious issues right now. I don't know if you've kept up with any of that. I mean, it's no joke. They've overbought everywhere. You're seeing a pullback in some of the commercial real estate areas. They've relied heavily in the tech areas on tech companies that have done these IPOs, and now they're pulling back. San Francisco. And so the way I look at it is that you've got some leading indicator markets. Now, I don't know if there's going to be a housing downturn because there's so much demand. But in the high-end markets in California, San Francisco, and New York, and Miami, these markets, they're having some issues on the high-end side, and it's going to start to kind of spread to the other areas. And it really is. There's a lot of layoffs happening, not wholesale, not wholesale layoffs around the country, but in some of these tech companies that were way overvalued. I mean, Peloton did their IPO. They lose, I think it's like, I forget the number. It's like $500 or $600 on every single bike they sell. They're valued at $7 billion. Their IPO is underperforming by 30%. Like and this is, I can name you 10 other companies that the same thing is happening, where they did the IPO, they're still valued at this crazy valuation, but they're losing money. And if they don't fix it very quickly, they're screwed. And so I don't know if you keep up with that and what your opinion is, or you watch that kind of stuff too much.
I mean, I have all my money in alternative assets. So after I started with Entrust eight now coming up on 8.5 years ago,
Wow.
and I didn't know anything about it until I started working with Entrust. And within a year, I had dumped all of my publicly traded stuff. And my first two investments were trust deeds. I used my IRA to lend money, and I held deed of trust. And
Awesome.
I now have one of those properties as personal ownership because they defaulted and went bankrupt, and I ended up getting the property. And then I have alternative assets. So, and we had mentioned this early, I'm aware of it from a standpoint of it's interesting,
Yeah.
and read about Uber and WeWork and some of these things that just sort of come across, and I'm aware of it on a purely sort of, I don't even know how to phrase it.
Interesting. It's interesting to see.
Yeah, not that it impacts me in any way, because I don't get into the publicly traded stuff. Now, I mean, we had some people who did pretty well with Lyft's IPO because they had invested through, I think it was through a crowdfunding site that they somehow were connected and ended up having Lyft. And they recently have started, some of these guys have recently started cashing in some of that. So if you can get in on one of those, one of those types of businesses that it pays out really well, I mean, you need to have a self-directed IRA to be able to get into it before it goes public.
Right.
Yeah, just largely on the publicly traded stuff and what's happened. I get people sometimes will call me because, they think that they'll start talking about the stock market, and I'll be like, oh, did it go down? Did it go up? I had no idea. I wasn't really even paying attention to it. But real estate for sure, right? I pay attention to that on a certain level. And you make a valid point. I mean, there's real estate has liquidity. When I was talking about sort of the illiquid was more of if you're investing indirectly through real estate through a syndicator or something.
Yeah, absolutely.
Be conscious of what you might need to do. Will the syndicator buy out your share? And is it contained in the contract in the event that you want to buy out early? So it was more along those lines. But you're right. I mean, real estate in general is going to be. It's not again, a publicly traded, it can be sold over.
Well, it's a word of caution. It's if you can, it's better to invest direct. I can't into a direct asset. I can't tell you. I was just looking up Lyft. Their IPO price was $72 a share. It's at $39 today.
Yeah.
So there's some people who got in and got out really quick.
The people bought in before. The people I'm talking about were before the IPO.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they did great.
When it was still just private.
But it's crazy. So tell me. So you've been with Entrust for 8 years plus. So how did you get into this? Tell me a little bit about your story, why you do what you do, what you're passionate about, and what are some other things? What do you believe in? What do you just tell me your story a little bit.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the end, which is that. So I've been working for over 30 years. I think I had one other job job that I liked. This may very well be the first job that I've loved. I genuinely, really, really, really like what I do. And how it happened was, I moved out here to the Bay Area to work for a big company that has a lot of footprint here in the Bay Area. And it was not working out. I was really, really unhappy there. And I was going through a little bit of stretch in my career where I was having trouble finding anything that I really enjoyed doing. And I wasn't working for a little bit. And I saw a posting on LinkedIn for a position that turned out at the time, the owner of our company, Hugh Broma, he had the Entrust Group, where we are a custodian or we were a self-directed IRA record keeper. We didn't even have our own trust company at that point. But he also had a franchise business where he had connected with some other business owners, and this was before I ever started, where they became really interested in the business, and he set up these licensing agreements to allow them to use the Entrust name, and he sort of taught them the business and provided back office support and helped them set up with forms and be there to answer questions. And they paid him a licensing fee. And it turned into, and more businesses. It turned out he had a lawyer look at it. He was running a franchise program, inadvertently running a franchise program. So he turned out to have these franchise agreements with all these different offices that were in different parts throughout the United States they were their own business, but they had Entrust in their name. So there was Entrust, whatever, Entrust this, Entrust that. But they were their own businesses. They were operated as franchise. I was hired in to be manager of franchise operations, and this was in 2011. It was a unique position that required a unique background, and I was really struggling with finding anything because I didn't really have like a specific sort of career path. I had just like a random, business world kind of thing for 20 some years. And so I came into this position, and I was in the job for 4 or 5 months. And we were having like a monthly meeting that was with the owner of the company and our CFO and CEO and myself and marketing manager and these different people. And we were all doing our sort of presentation about our special area of management. And by the end of the meeting, we had a discussion around the franchise program. By the end of the meeting, Hugh, the owner of the company, decided he didn't want to have the franchise program anymore. I don't think this was not like all of a sudden completely out of the blue. I think he probably thinking about it. It was relatively out of the blue to me. And so if you don't have a franchise operations, you don't need a manager of franchise operations. But they valued sort of some of the background I had in the skill set. And so we went through a little bit of a restructure in more than just the franchise program. And they gave me a position to oversee compliance and internal audit, which were two things that I had never done in an industry that I was like just learning.
A very regulated industry at that.
Tremendously regulated. So compliance is a lot of documentation, right? Like a big part of the job is just creating all kinds of documentation in the event of an audit for like regulatory audits, and we're subject to regulatory audits. So. But it was a very solitary sort of position. But in doing that, I was really learning a lot about the industry, because you get in the compliance part, you like really have to know like the Internal Revenue Code, Section 4975, a lot of these things that really, really benefit me now. So it was great. That part was cool, but I really didn't like it. It was a very solitary position, and I'm somewhat of a social guy. And so I would find myself like out and about, just meeting people, being out in the Bay Area, and people would you stand a question, what do you do for a living? And I would start talking about what my company does, what self-directed IRAs are. And I would see like these reactions that people like who had no idea that you could invest in real estate, these other things, the reaction that they would give me. And I would find myself really enjoy talking about it. And we had a business development manager who ended up leaving, and then it sat empty for a little while. And so I was doing this compliance position for a few years, but I wasn't loving it. And I think the president could tell. And so we had a meeting one time, we were talking, and he's like, look, you don't seem like all that thrilled with it. And I explained, I really like what we do, but he was right. I didn't really like that specific position. I said, that business development job, I think I'd be good at that. And so they had me for like a couple of years. They pulled some of the work away. And so I was doing both compliance and the business development thing. And then about 4 or 5 years ago, I was full-time business development. And I have to sometimes like regulate myself when I'm out in social situations and people ask me what I do, because I'll just start talking about self-directed IRAs and just like, I'm off and running.
I'm the same way with single family rental investing. I can give you a 30-second, 2-minute, 5-minute, 10-minute, or 30 or an hour talk on it. Like I can, wherever you want me to go, I can just go off in a direction where sometimes you see people go, oh, okay, all right, but whatever.
Yeah, their eyes start to glaze out. Yeah. Like I see when they're like, if I can start seeing the whites of their eyes, then I start to.
But what people do respect and what people do see is your passion. And if you're passionate about something, you don't even have to sell, your passion comes through. So.
Well, and the thing for me that I don't, if I had to try and convince people to do this, I don't think I would enjoy the job. I'm not trying to convince anybody they should have a self-directed IRA. I'm just explaining what the rules are. Now, if I get somebody who says like, why should I do InTrust versus one of your competitors, then I can turn on a little bit of a sales mode, because we do have our sort of what we feel like is our competitive advantage. But other than that, it's all just explaining the rules, and because of the compliance position, because I've been doing it for as long as I have, like I feel really comfortable, like in any, like with really largely any question that I'm going to get asked. I do a lot of presentations. I kind of like standing up in front of a room of 50 or 60 real estate investors and having them ping me with questions. And I genuinely like that. I like that part of the job.
Well, that's awesome. No, that's awesome. Yeah, it's if you're passionate about what you do and you're genuine, it makes things so much easier. It
took me a long time to get to that point. I don't take it for granted to at this point, finally towards the end of my career, to actually have finally landed in something. And before I started with InTrust, I just wanted to get a job that I could tolerate. I just wanted to be a job that paid the bills, that didn't make me painfully sad to go into the job every day.
I had the same thing. I think a job that I had, besides the menial jobs when you're younger, I had a job as I was working for a staffing and placement company, recruiting and career placement and that kind of stuff. And I was managing an office, and I had to go out and pitch people on using us to fill their contractor jobs, whether it's a tech contract. It was mostly tech stuff. And I couldn't do it. I just could not. I could not get passionate about it, because I wasn't really helping people. I wasn't really guiding people. And now, I have I could probably do the job now because I have a skill set that I could figure it out, but I wouldn't be too passionate about it. And it's important to be passionate and do what you do. So where are you from? Where do you live?
Well, I'm in the Bay. I'm in Oakland now. We're headquartered in Oakland, and I have about a 15-minute walk to work, which is pretty sweet. Another reason I'm really, really happy. But I grew up in the East Coast. I grew up in Pennsylvania. I moved from Western Pennsylvania, a small town outside of Pittsburgh, but I moved here from Chicago. And I spent some time in Philly and New York, and briefly in Utah at one point. So I've kind of been around. Yeah. But yeah, I'm pretty settled in here now. And it's really crazy expensive out here. Like you were talking about and I was just reading earlier, there's an article on LinkedIn about places that people are moving away from and moving to. Philly, apparently people are moving to, because it's
affordable.
The cost of the housing there versus income is a real nice ratio, whereas here it's painfully bad.
So
it's cool here. The weather's nice.
it's funny because I was in Chicago before. I live in Colorado now, but I built my business and sales and everything I do and why I'm good at what I do by being in Chicago, and just the ruthlessness, especially in real estate. And I had a point where I was living in Chicago, and we kind of hit that point where our kids got a little bit older, and we're like, okay, well, everybody in Chicago, their kids will get a little bit older, they move to the suburbs.
Right.
And we decided to move to Colorado. I grew up in Colorado originally. So we moved to Colorado, and people thought I was crazy because I had a very great business there, commercial real estate brokerage, and it was doing really well. And I kind of threw all that away. Asked me, maybe even my parents, I threw all that away to move to Colorado and kind of start over. And at the same time, remote working has become popular. Yeah. So the being able to live where you want, aside from, look, I live in Steamboat Springs, Colorado. It is not inexpensive to live here, but the lifestyle that I want to have is here. And so being, I've become a much more productive employee, living where I want to live and doing what I want to do and being passionate about it, and knowing that in order to continue the lifestyle that I want to have, I need to be good at what I do and be passionate about what I do. And it motivates you in a completely different way. And, I'm sitting in my home office right now, and that's great. And sometimes it's lonely. Like if I didn't do this stuff, I think I would go crazy, because I do travel, but traveling is overrated, right? You go to conferences and stuff, and it's it's overrated. But being passionate about what you do, and that'll show. And it's now turned into more about personal branding for companies and promoting people within a company that can personally brand your company and go out there and be that voice and evangelist for your company. And that's so powerful. And I notice you do a lot of podcasts and different things like that. So that's a big thing that I like to talk about and focus on. But we're going to wrap up the show. If somebody has an IRA, what happens when somebody comes to you and says, I have all my money over here in an IRA, but I want to do self-directed IRA investing? And what's your value proposition? Do you suggest they bring their money over, or do you just say, hey, talk to them? And how do you handle that situation, and what do you suggest?
Yeah, I mean, it's really very straightforward. If you want to invest in an alternative asset, you need a company like Entrust. And and our business model is around providing a single point of contact. So I'm a regional business development manager. I have 3 counterparts in the company. So depending upon where you are in the country, you'll either talk to me or you'll talk to one of our 3 counterparts. And my role is not to try and convince somebody to do that. My role is to explain, what are you thinking about investing in? And if it's real estate, or if it's a private placement or whatever, or maybe they're just asking general questions, I essentially have largely the same conversation I had with you today.
Right.
Here's what you need to know. Here's how it works. If you want to move forward, you can establish an account with us. You can either fill out PDFs of the forms. We need you have to open an account with us, right? You have to actually physically open an account, either by completing an account application, the forms, or just going to our website, clicking open an account. It'll take you 10 minutes. You'll have an account established. It doesn't take any time at all. Then you have to fund the account. You have to transfer money over from your existing IRA, which is an IRA to IRA transfer.
Are there a lot of fees to do that?
What's that?
The transfer fees? Or what is a typical fee?
Transfer? No, it's
okay.
I mean, the custodian you're transferring from might potentially charge you some kind of termination fee or something like that. But even that, most of the time, you don't. Particularly when it's a brokerage firm, and you don't have to transfer the whole amount. If you want to invest some money in a real estate while keeping some money in over with Merrill Lynch, just do a partial transfer. You don't have to put the whole money. Yeah. Or if you have an old 401k with a company you used to work for you, that's a rollover. So there's a process that IRA to IRA transfer is handled a little bit differently than a 401k to IRA rollover. So I assist them with that to understand the process and make sure that they get us the right documents and all that stuff. But again, if somebody calls up, I'm not going to say, well, here's why you should do it. It's like, okay, well, if you want to, here's how it works. Here's what you need to do. Here's the paperwork we're going to need, et cetera. Here's how long it typically takes. Practically every phone call that I have at some point asks, what's the process? How long does it take? And what are your fees? And so that's really essentially if I could people will ask specific questions around I'm a CEO of my company and I want to do this, or I've got this property and there's this other people involved and how does it work? We might get into some more nitty gritty, but largely every conversation I have, largely a lot of times the conversation is simply that: what's the process? How long does it take? And what are your fees? And oftentimes it'll expand beyond that, but practically every individual conversation I have is those are going to be, I can summarize those are going to be the 3 questions that I end up answering. And
so you can't advise people on what to invest in, but do you have a resource page on your website where they can go and kind of navigate? So if somebody comes to you and says, I want to invest, but I don't know what to invest into in real estate. I want to buy a single family rental,
So we have what we call the Learning Center, which is, and I'm gonna toot our horn for a little bit. We're the first company. We are absolutely recognized. Entrust is recognized the leading educator in our industry. There are other companies that created their own learning centers after we did. We're the only company that is gotten certification from different states to provide it. So we have a two credit CE class for realtors called the Basics of Real Estate IRAs. We have a class that provides CE credit for certified financial planners, and we have one for CPAs. We also are the only company where we teach a class, JP from our company, and it's happening in Nashville. We have a class annually where we teach our competitors. It's a week-long class where they then take the Certified IRA Service Professional course in order to pass that. Entrust teaches that class. We're the only company that does that. So we have a learning center that has a ton of educational information on, trust deed investing, tax liens, multifamily, like all kinds of stuff, cannabis. We do monthly educational webinars where we oftentimes bring in subject matter experts. We did one earlier this year on investing in cryptocurrency.
So I've got the learning center up here. Now that's awesome.
So
great.
Yeah, all kinds.
Well, that's a different conversation we'll have to have. We should, we put out a ton of content about real estate investing and things like that. So we'll do some cross stuff here,
Yeah, for sure.
But yeah, I really appreciate it. And it's funny because I used to be a company that I worked for that was not the most pleasant experience. So I won't mention them. When I first moved to Colorado, we were targeting interests to advertise on our website. We did some real estate investing stuff. And so I had some conversations with, I'm not sure who it was, but I'll have to look back in my notes, but it was interesting stuff. So really appreciate you coming on the show. And just a wealth of information that was awesome. And I'll have to have you come on again sometime because there's just so much with investing, IRA investing, and we're getting a lot more people come to us about this. And because of the how volatile stocks and bonds are and what's going in the market, it's this is becoming more and more of something that is a conversation we're having. So great stuff. I really appreciate you having you on, Bill. And let's continue the conversation.
Yeah, no, thanks. It was my pleasure.
Yeah, you bet. I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.
All right.
Bye-bye.